Under the dark night sky stood a mystical castle, illuminated by the shining moon. This was the castle of the Demon King, a symbol of the war's end. The moonlight penetrated the grand hall of the magnificent palace. In the corner of the vast hall, the silhouette of a long cross appeared in the shadows. Beneath the cross, a demon knelt in a crouched position, her body bleeding, with pink flames burning from his back, giving the impression of something with invisible wings. Blood streamed from his eyes. She couldn't understand why people refused to accept the world as it was. In the midst of the darkness stood a blond man clad in armor, looking down at the weary figure. His face glowed, and his eyes radiated mockery, with a sarcastic smile confirming his feelings. Did the creature before him truly believe that a world could exist where humans and demons lived peacefully side by side? In the darkness, the possessed demon's eyes shone with anger. At that moment, another force incarnated beneath the cross as if in a ritual, awakening something extraordinary in the night and plunging the world into mystery and magic. Kneeling, she transformed before my eyes, suddenly spreading real pink wings behind her, and a pair of curved horns appeared on her head. With a new wave of rage and hatred, she rose from her crouch and charged at the night. Each of her steps filled the air with dark energy, and her impending attack seemed inevitable. Sparks of fury ignited from her eyes as if her opponent would be consumed by terrible magic. However, a sinister and cunning smile appeared on the knight's face, who stood like a predator ready to unleash a masterful trick. Suddenly, a girl appeared behind the demon. She stepped into the light, clad in armor with a sword drawn. An extraordinary power shone in her eyes. The tip of her sword was sharp, ready to destroy evil. The demon only had time to turn, glimpsing the danger approaching from behind. In a single breath, the force in the girl's hand drove her sword through the demon, the sharp blade effortlessly destroying the demon's terrifying form, leaving a trail of blood. The demon wondered, as the blonde man greeted her, how he could find a poison strong enough to kill the demon after her attack. The creature spewed a stream of blood from her mouth. The girl's eyes began to twitch under the effect of the constant pain, reflecting indescribable suffering. Her body trembled with convulsions. At that moment, the girl's eyes shone with pure victory and superiority, as if an unexpected inner power ignited within her, and she looked at the demon with arrogance. Despair enveloped the demon-possessed woman, who struggled to lift her hand, trying to reach a piece of the knight's clothing. The warrior showed a worried expression. He could not accept that the disgusting creature would touch him. The girl ordered the hand to be removed from her tunic without hesitation. She immediately invoked her right to revenge. Her sword was raised into the air, and with unquenchable fury, she struck the demon-possessed woman in a storm of blows. Her movements were so precise. Near the battlefield, a small cloaked figure stood, its face hidden beneath a dark hood, only its large blue eyes shining endlessly. He could not hold back his tears at this grim sight, while the blonde man relentlessly tortured the demon's body. Someone dared to touch her shoulder, halting the storm of his wrath, explaining that the Demon King possessed immortality, and that ordinary physical mutilation would not be enough to kill him, causing decisive destruction. In fact, by then, all wounds had already healed. The armored blonde explained that to seal this creature, it must be tortured by every possible means and its soul brought to a state of utter despair. Her lips curled into a sinister smile full of malice and superiority. Darkness must rot within darkness. 5 warriors gathered around the demon's body, glaring at it with threatening stares as if it were a trophy. This menacing place reeked of the stench of evil that had recently dwelled here. In the shadows of this place, there was a small creature, and within that small creature was not only fear, but also deep concern for its demon master. Its small body trembled with fear. The situation was incredibly tense, and this creature realized that disaster was imminent. If it did nothing now, the demon mistress lifted her gaze, haggard, towards the small creature standing in the corner of the dark room. Her bloodied and tormented face reflected the anxiety and pain of her recent defeat. As her gaze met that of the little monster named Archie, an internal conflict arose within her soul. Her heart torn between wanting to be close to her loyal companion and realizing that its life was also in danger. Her lips parted slightly as she gave the command to little Archie to rise and save its life, her voice echoing like a soft layer of kindness infused with immense determination and sorrow. The small creature's blue eyes widened as if, for the first time, they saw something unexpected. In that moment, those eyes reflected not only shock but also resolve, as if the little warrior within it had risen and taken over. The demon was suddenly lifted, held by her arms, her face showing signs of suffering. Blood continued to flow profusely, leaving a red trail on the floor. One of those mocking her took advantage of her helplessness and displayed a smile of amusement on her face. The blade of a knife gleamed in her cold, blood-stained hand. He stabbed the young girl with the knife, tearing her clothes. The victim was in a state of shock, her face showing helplessness and despair. She could do nothing, her body frozen while pain overwhelmed her from within. Her body suddenly collapsed to the floor, with no one attempting to make it seem as if her fall carried any danger, treating her like a piece of meat that could be thrown to the ground and forgotten. With a creepy smile, the perpetrator continued his inhumane torture. The knife in his hand twirled in the air. The young girl sat helplessly, choking on poison. She pressed her hands against her body. Her freedom had been stripped from her, the vile faces of the attackers shining with satisfaction. The armored, human-shaped monsters, harboring treachery in their disgusting souls, relished the moment, watching her helpless body. The attackers realized the extent of her strength. Under the influence of poison, she seemed like nothing in their eyes. They roughly yanked her hair, forcing her to meet their gaze, causing pain that drew tears from her eyes, warning her that she should prepare for the terrible things to come. Despair exploded in her eyes as she realized that these people would toy with her until she became a helpless puppet in their hands. Dirty hands reached out to her, she screamed, begging them to stop, but they continued their evil deeds, ignoring her pleas. Her helplessness grew as time passed. She was treated as if she were just a piece of meat, without freedom or the right to determine her own fate. She was drowning in a terrible situation, her body becoming an object of inhumane actions, like a doll to be handled at will, touched without mercy anywhere, and brutally violated. These horrific scenes of injustice and suffering became part of her reality. This was the breaking point that made everything unbearable for Archie, and he quickly acted. His decision made in a whirlwind of memories of how that demon woman had once protected him. The fear and helplessness he had once felt turned into a determination to protect his benefactor. The woman was shocked, and her hood fell, revealing her face. Archie's gaze was full of anger and determination. He couldn't stand by knowing that the woman who had cared for him like an older sister had become the target of such horrific violence. No, she wasn't just his sister, she was his holy and beautiful mother. It was inhuman and unforgivable to treat someone close to him in such a way. The young girl who had paralyzed the demon with poison screamed in shock as the small creature leaped toward her with the intent to touch her, her eyes widening in surprise at this unusual being. His small hand touched her abdomen. He knew what he was doing, but the blonde girl was utterly confused at that moment. She looked at this tiny ally in amazement, not anticipating what would happen next. Her eyes widened. How dare he touch her, even with magic? Horror and disgust washed over her, and she couldn't comprehend how this tiny creature dared to do such a thing. The spell grew in the palm of her hand, a circle of mysterious signs glowing with green light. The glowing symbols began to pulse. Archie stepped back, realizing that this desperate attempt to save the young girl might be his last act of courage. Perhaps he would sacrifice his life to try to change the course of events. The blonde girl's eyes widened, and her pupils narrowed, reflecting not only shock but also horror at what had just happened to her. She felt rage surge through every muscle in her body, the emotion coursing through her blood, forcing her anger to erupt into uncontrollable fury. She drew her sword, easily and suddenly cutting off the baby's head, leaving the noble elf, who had once been gentle and kind, as the embodiment of aggression and vengeance. The apprentice's blood splattered right in front of the half-alive demon's eyes, creating a horrifying scene. A wave of terror and pain swept across her face. The creature she had taken had just lost its life at her feet. It seemed that it wasn't just the loss of a precious life, but also a blow to the essence of her being. Archie's head rolled on the blood-soaked floor, her nearly lifeless eyes reflecting his master's shocked face. At that moment, he realized the unfortunate fate and final turning point of his destiny. Yet, even in these final moments, he knew what he had left as his essence. The deadly silence was broken by the Demon King's scream, filled with agonizing despair. The scream sounded like a voice extracted from the deepest corners of her soul, expressing loss and sorrow. At that moment, she felt as if she had lost a part of her own essence, as if she had lost the most precious part of himself. With 1,000 emotions in her heart, she rushed forward. She was no longer afraid of anything. Her soul overflowed with emotion, and her eyes were fixed on a single goal. Gathering the last strength remaining in her, she clenched her fists only to reach that original small creature. Despair and sadness shone in her eyes. Darkness enveloped him along with the gleaming sword of the armored man. Eyes widened as he swung his weapon mercilessly with an indifferent expression on his face, cutting off her arm. She fell to his knees, and the darkness of unbearable pain engulfed her body. Blood spurted from her wound like a living river, creating a dark contrast to the surrounding darkness. Her body trembled under the weight of her suffering. She struggled to lift his head, her teeth clenched against the pain. The man stood over her, his expression showing not the slightest hint of mercy, as if he had no feelings at all. The steel pierced his flesh, leaving a wound. She could feel death approaching as the sword was capable of wounding her so severely that it would soon sever her limbs. The Demon King was fully absorbed in his misery, his gloomy thoughts overshadowed by a torrent of voices preventing him from hearing his own words. His entire world was now focused on Archie, his small companion who had lost his life, only whispering his name softly. With all the strength of her will, she tried to reach Archie's head, but even that seemingly small distance felt so far away to her. She didn't realize that her voice sounded weak and distorted. The demon's smile and the knight's cynical gaze were like an axe severing the last remnants of mercy and memories of those close to him. He mocked her feelings, mocked the fact that he could still feel something for the one close to her. The death of a loved one was before him, and the knight grasped his sword, ready for the final blow. He approached the girl slowly, as if savoring every moment of this horrific victory, his faint breath mingling with the gloomy atmosphere. She was powerless before this merciless foe, who relished in her victory, deriving cruel pleasure from the suffering she inflicted. His gaze transformed into a fiery aggression, ready to burn everything in its path. As if his blue eyes were windows to the depths of hell, he was prepared to deliver the final fatal blow. A golden aura surrounded the knight's sword. In that moment, the weapon became not just a tool of physical destruction, but also an instrument to inflict divine suffering. In his hands, he wielded power capable of destroying even the essence of the demon itself. Now, the Demon King would be buried in fear, her tormented body destined for eternal suffering. With a scream, the sword pierced the air, aimed at the demonic entity before him. At that moment, the magical energy emitted by the weapon created a vortex that enveloped the knight in a storm of raging fury. Her face became the embodiment of determination mixed with madness. A yellow light suddenly pierced the darkness, blinding everyone nearby. A swift and powerful clash occurred, like lightning striking the girl, like an electric shock. In the bright light, yellow lightning seemed to burn around them, creating a temporary world where light and darkness battled for supremacy. Archie's blue eyes darkened as he witnessed the final emergence of darkness in his life, the last spark of his essence extinguished. The space around him seemed to freeze. The demonic power that had once been so strong and tumultuous was now swallowed by absolute darkness. The Demon King's face, once distorted by a storm of emotions, now froze like stone, reflecting only the final trace of despair. The last moments of her essence sank into an unimaginable darkness and loss. Her blood-soaked body, which had once radiated magic and threat, now lay breathless. A monstrous grin appeared on the knight's face. He tried to hide it, covering his face with his hand, as if refusing to acknowledge that his soul had been enveloped by darkness. The hand on his face slowly slid down, revealing a terrifying smile like a beast hiding within a human shell. He couldn't contain his joy as he leaned back, laughing with hellish delight. His laughter was filled with triumph. The one who had beheaded Archie looked at him once more with a sense of grandeur and disdain for the small creature whose head had been severed. His eyes reflected victory over his enemy. He felt no regret, only pride in his victory. She touched her stomach once again, wondering what had really happened. But her body was still intact. She could feel that something had changed within her, but she couldn't immediately discern what kind of magic Archie had used. Her skin was unscathed, with no signs of damage. She ran toward the knight, sensing that the final step toward victory was near. This was the moment of sealing, her heart beating faster with excitement and effort. Some time later, when all the chaotic events had passed, peace and tranquility dominated. The blonde had overcome everything. The difficulties faced in restoring his life and his family, who were preparing for the joyful event of pregnancy, were significant, but the fetus developed remarkably well without any major issues. However, the effects of the spell had left a unique mark on the child's development. The dark spell cast on Archie had left a trace on the boy's body, beginning to cause harm. A mysterious aura reflecting the evil essence embedded within him through magic began to manifest. The phenomenon of parasitism, usually seen in birds that lay their eggs in the nests of other birds to hatch their own, had been used by demons to absorb the soul of a human embryo and implant their own soul in its place using forbidden techniques. 6 years passed in peace and harmony, the family living in comfort, enjoying the wonders of life. The boy, with dark powers, despite his demonic heritage, showed no sign of it. The child was named Elixir. The mother, filled with happiness, found the name a reflection of her peaceful state. The time spent with Elixir was a source of true joy and peace for her. Elixir was a real ray of sunshine in the family's life. His curiosity and joy filled every corner of the house with warmth and light. The family cherished the moments spent together, and Elixir, with eyes full of childlike joy as he looked at his mother, filled her heart with indescribable happiness. The true strength of Elixir seems to lie in the shadows, as in the daily life of his childhood. No one in the family could have predicted the extraordinary changes and adventures that the future would bring. We are presented with a little brown-haired girl with blue eyes who is smiling and happy. But could this not become a threat to humanity in the future? The answer is simple, although not so clear. It's not Elixir. His name was Archie in a previous life. He had been beheaded. Yes, that little monster was reborn as a sweet and happy human. Just before his death, he cast a parasitism spell on one of the heroes, and he became a fetus in that woman's womb. A wise decision. Thankfully, it crossed his mind before he died. Parasitism was the only thing sufficient for her magical energy because in his previous life, he was a very weak demon, incapable of much. Now, he was reborn into a family of those involved in the murder. This was done to reincarnate the Demon King as the child of a hated enemy, the child of a woman who had humiliated a Demon King. It was extremely difficult, but he was driven by a great purpose and desire that he could not let go of. The ruler was everything to him in this world. Archie didn't even know who he was, and he made him understand. He was born from an egg that was too weak, so the demons rejected him, forcing him to live off human scraps where he had to endure even more torment. It was then that he met someone who became the closest thing to family in this world. He saw her attackers in the alley and drew their attention, her eyes blazing with anger. When he turned towards her, he saw the flash of two eyes that were not human, that drove the insects away from the baby, scaring the little one who wouldn't have been frightened by ordinary people. She wondered who Archie was. It was the first time she had seen such a weak demon, and as a king, she had seen many. Raising her head to see the face of the creature she had saved, his vision of Archie slowly faded, and she saw her clearly. The woman asked for his name, but Archie couldn't utter a word. It seemed to his a problem to know who was in front of her. Soon after, the decision was swift. The woman stroked the little demon's head, showing that she had good intentions. It was then that she showed tenderness and affection towards him and offered to take him to live together. She was very gentle and smiled. She saved a demon who didn't even have a name and whose life was worth nothing. A very brave and responsible act that couldn't be ignored. They spent a lot of time together, especially during frequent meetings in the Grand Library, where the towering bookshelves seemed endless. The demon sat on a chair like a throne, realizing that the boy had a great love for reading. In fact, the little demon loved books so much, and he tried to absorb everything written with intense interest. Then, he leaned her head back and thought about something, delving deeper into his thoughts, then dramatically clapped his hands. An idea came to her. She suggested naming the monster Archie. It wasn't a good idea to live without a name. The creature wondered how something like that had happened to her. She tried to pronounce the first letter. Vladica explained that she wanted to call her Archie book, which was perfect for an enthusiastic book lover like her. The demon felt embarrassed and almost managed to pronounce her name but couldn't say the letter R, which amused her new friend even more. In an instant, the little demon started repeating her name over and over with excitement, and the young girl was delighted with her efforts. Her face was joyful, and her heart was filled with tenderness. One day, standing on a terrace illuminated by a lone moon in the sky, she decided to explain why she had taken her into her castle. The answer was simple: she wanted to. At the same time, her face turned into an awkward smile. Yes, for a very foolish reason. She turned towards the bright moon and explained that she had no family of her own, that she had been alone in this castle since birth. Loneliness was something she had accepted. She was about to say something else, but she stopped and took a deep breath. Then she looked at the demon baby. All the other demons and humans had families, but although her body was human and very attractive, she couldn't conceive. No matter how hard Vladica tried, she failed. This was an indescribable pain for her, the realization that she would never succeed. As sad as it was perhaps the fate of the Demon King. Archie, who stood in the background, listened with deep admiration. The emotional moment was felt not only by them but also by the full moon, which gently illuminated their surroundings. Vladica reached for Archie's hand, and from her touch emanated warmth, not just physically but also spiritually. Her palm conveyed gentleness and care. Her appearance would be long reflected in the eyes of the baby demon. Her long, pink hair and bright yellow eyes were illuminated by the cold yet soft moonlight. Here, she embraced him, holding him close like a mother to her own child. He was her Archie. At that moment, her face reflected all her worries and compassion. She was calm. She had never felt so comfortable. But that was only a memory now. Archie was now in the body of a boy named Elixir. His mother had already called him, wondering why he was late. No one could imagine how difficult it was to be a child who must always please parents he despised with all his soul. The blonde girl was named Liselot, and now this woman was his human mother. But that didn't change the fact that she had humiliated the Demon King. This would be a thorn in his side in this life, knowing he had chosen to walk this dangerous path. When Liselot turned around, her child's face twisted into a terrifying grin. He swore that he would kill the 8 heroes, including her. Within their bodies were crystals where parts of the Demon King were sealed. Killing the heroes and resurrecting him was Archie's mission. However, while he had to pretend to be a normal, sweet, and obedient child, during a picnic with his mother, he reached into the food basket and pulled out a large ham and cheese sandwich. His face changed. The pleasure of it would make anyone drool. However, Liselot opposed him and handed him a much healthier vegetable sandwich instead. With the resurrection, Archie also gained power. His demonic eyes were enough to look into someone's eyes and instantly bend their will to his. Instantly, the blonde changed her mind. The baby needed meat, so let him enjoy the delicious meal. The child was satisfied, chewing the tasty food with both cheeks full, swallowing the pieces greedily. So far, the demonic eyes were still weak and less effective against the heroes, but this heroine was easily influenced by the demonic eyes, simply because he was her child. In his 6 years of life as a human, he had learned one thing by observing this girl. Her greatest weakness was that family was her greatest vulnerability. Killing this defenseless woman wouldn't be difficult. It seemed that a simple command to kill her would be enough. However, there was a problem. Archie glanced briefly, and that problem was Sword, a hero, a true warrior, and his father in this life. A dark room was dimly lit by a soft pink light, where a cross stood on a pedestal. Sword stood upon it with a large scythe, telling the Demon King that he didn't even know what kind of man would stab something into him. He crouched over his chained body, hoping that all the women and children who were killed and raped by the demons could take revenge. His voice trembled as he raised his bloodied, anguish-filled face and began to threaten that even if she managed to conceive, he would cut the fetus out of her by slitting her belly. His eyes glowed red with fury and aggression. He reached out towards her, intending to devour the girl before him as his people did to humans. Archie looked at this hero in fear, realizing that this man was currently stronger than him. He was still too weak to compete with a man like that, who had no feelings for his son. Liselot also waved her hand at her husband, and the boy already had a plan in his head to eliminate even such a hero. Although he could resist him with his own spiritual power, his face always appeared unsatisfied and shameless. His father didn't respond to the blonde's gesture. This was the way things were done in this world, to be envious of one's own son. Archie rested his head in his hands and pondered. He would use this woman because she was the hero's lover, and then his sweet and long-awaited revenge would be realized, turning all his dark thoughts and desires into reality. He would return to God and destroy all the violators in that house. In the middle of the night, a scream was heard. From the slightly ajar door, the center of the family scandal could be seen. Sword admitted that he couldn't love Elixir, and Liselot didn't understand why. That was his son. She truly didn't understand his position. Her husband had always wanted a child. What was wrong with that? The man explained that the child didn't love him. He didn't laugh or talk, which wasn't normal. The woman didn't understand, which led Liselot to say that he just needed to be more open with the child. At that moment, the subject of their argument appeared in the hallway, from where the scream had come. Rudo crouched, holding his head. He genuinely tried to be a father, doing what he could, but his child's eyes staring at him made the man shiver. The little boy wasn't human. His instincts told him so. The blonde didn't complain. Tears of anger welled up in his eyes, though he didn't dare to say that about his son. The man turned his back to her and began muttering that his child didn't resemble him, neither in hair color nor appearance, and that his eyes weren't just strange but also resembled those of a demon. Then he realized what had just come out of his mouth and turned back with a shocked and fearful expression on his face. Though he spoke in a low voice, it was enough for his wife to hear everything, and his fear was not without reason. Liselot looked at him with deep anger, barely able to contain herself. So dark, so rarely seen like that, she couldn't believe what she was hearing. Her husband immediately began to apologize, saying that he didn't mean to imply that it wasn't his child. But it was too late. He had already crossed a line he shouldn't have. The woman let out an angry scream. Her rage and displeasure knew no bounds. This meant, according to her husband, that she had sinned with a demon. How could he fabricate such a lie? She ran off crying. It was beyond her ability to handle. How could he think like that about his lover? Though the man tried to stop her, he failed. The only thing he heard in response was that he was the real demon here. Running down the hallway, she tried not to sob so as not to wake her son. But her despair was so great that she had to fight hard to succeed. In the hallway, she found a small Elixir rubbing his eyes with a sleepy expression. He had been awakened by a loud scream and began asking what was happening. His mother just hugged him, pulling him closer to try to hide the fact that she herself was shaken. She apologized and said that everything was fine, that he didn't need to know what had just happened. What had just happened left her speechless, then she suggested they go to her room. She walked towards the bed, keeping a good position in front of her child while smiling and trying to put the baby to sleep. Elixir covered his face with a blanket, and a tear fell from his eye as he realized his parents had fought, wondering if it was his fault. Liselot made an indifferent expression as if nothing had happened and said everything was okay, that he was her child, and that she was proud of him even though her heart was breaking inside her chest as she caressed her baby. She said that his father just needed to get to know him better. Then Archie activated his demonic eyes and asked what the woman really wanted. The woman tensed up, sweat running down her face, and her pupils narrowed. What power dominated her, even though she herself was not aware of it? She just wanted to live happily ever after with Elixir and his father, her husband. Archie couldn't help but laugh when he saw the woman smiling, a satisfied smile appearing on his sly and evil face. And Liselot continued, it seemed that his father was afraid of Elixir, and there seemed to be another reason. Sword had another woman. Then Archie asked if the mother just wanted to be loved. Of course, the girl replied that she wanted that she wanted his father to love her as a wife and as a woman. The boy's face lit up with madness, then he couldn't give her what she wanted. Just looking at her child, she saw a dark-skinned boy, and then something happened. An image of her husband approaching her with great desire appeared. A pleasant feeling spread throughout the blonde woman's body. Warmth spread all over her body as if she were ascending to heaven from the pleasure of the moment. Lying in bed, she breathed heavily, moaning, her body reacting as if she were making love and she couldn't control it. Archie watched it all with disgust and grandeur. How annoying these people were. He made her see Sword instead. The illusion of the demonic eyes turned out to be useful. He covered his face with his hand, contemplating, because the effect of the illusion didn't last long. The only question was how to show Rudo to Liselot. The choice for him was clear. He would make the hero look like a scoundrel. The man had already taken this path in the eyes of his wife. Elixir slept soundly in the colony while the door to his room creaked open. But the child didn't hear it. Sword entered the room, but not like that. The glimmer of light from the moon's rays shone. What the man held in his hand was a dagger. He swung the shining tip above his head, but someone entered the room. The man was shocked. It was his wife. She didn't let him attack. With anger in her eyes, she deflected the blow with her sword. She stood there, staring at him without thinking, her maternal instincts kicking in, commanding a demon-like sword not to touch her child. The man tried to explain that what was in the cradle was just manipulating him, and they told him to be quiet. They fought, staring at each other with crossed arms. They had become enemies. The father shouted, trying to tell her that it wasn't her child, but the mother shut his mouth, calling him an evil demon. It was her child, and she would not let him kill it. She commanded her child to run, and the child didn't care. Everything was going according to his plan. He stood under the purple moonlight that ruled the sky, everything trembling from his evil laughter. Humans were so imperfect and vile that he managed to make them spin around his fingers and force some of his closest ones to turn against each other. He laughed at them, mocking their flaws and weaknesses, those who had the power to destroy demons, and the reason they were given such a gift. The child raised his hand symbolically, reaching out to the deep sky as if trying to touch it. He spoke to his master, wondering if he was watching. Though his strength was lacking, he succeeded in his first sweet and unforgettable revenge. He pleaded for his master to continue watching over him since it was all done for him. He would do everything for his master. He placed his hand on his chest and promised that the Overlord would not doubt that he would punish all the heroes who tried to take his life. However, Archie miscalculated something. Sword was behind him and heard everything. The man was covered in wounds, and his clothes were torn. He had just witnessed his worst fears come true. Archie turned to him with a sneer. He had truly survived. He had expected something different. Clearly, Archie had underestimated Sword. Liselot fainted, and her father came to kill the demon. His eyes burned with rage. He was ready to end the creature that had disguised itself as his child. He ordered that this be conveyed to the true son of that man. The demon smiled and said that he had devoured the son because the hero's child had a delicious taste. Madness burned in the man's eyes, and he screamed uncontrollably. His rage engulfed him from head to toe. The monster would pay for what it had done. His weapon nearly fell on the child, who turned out to be a monster of flesh and blood, ruining the couple's lives. Suddenly, his old son appeared before Sword's eyes, small and sweet with big blue eyes and black hair combed back, looking at him with mercy, unable to believe that his father would kill him. His eyes widened. This brought him back to his senses, or rather, the illusion successfully disturbed his mind. The sword stopped just above the creature's head. The hero's hand trembled. He couldn't bring himself to do it. He remembered how hard he had worked day and night. They asked him why and how he could work while leaving his pregnant wife alone. He was earning money for the baby's future, but he used to be a great fighter from the guild. So, why did he choose to work in a coal mine for a young girl who had been forgotten? The man wiped the sweat and dust from his face. He looked at his conversation partner and replied that he only wanted to ensure Liselot had a normal life. Besides, he had to become a father and therefore be a strong backbone for his family. That was his duty. A blow he didn't expect, the tip of a sword appeared from his chest. The weapon pierced him from behind. Standing behind him was the figure of his beloved wife. Sword couldn't believe it. His love had just delivered a fatal blow to the man she had vowed to love. His eyes widened, and the name of the woman he wanted to establish as a happy family got stuck on his lips. Her gaze was filled with anger and hatred. She no longer cared about the man. The man had almost killed her son, and she couldn't let that happen. With a heavy breath, she stood over her husband's lifeless body, but her choice was the right one for her. No one dared to hurt her son. Sword lay dead. His blood flowed faster now because the family he had fought so hard for had vanished. Archie stood under the moonlight, filled with evil energy. Even his gaze showed that everything was going according to his plan. He chanted a spell, or rather dispelled the previous spell. The purple light disappeared everywhere, and everything became clearer. The image was blurry, but something was happening. Suddenly, the beloved woman, now dead and covered in blood, appeared before her eyes. Shock enveloped her. She couldn't believe it was really happening. How could this happen? Liselot fell to her knees, trembling. She still hadn't realized what had happened. Suddenly, the son she had defended so fiercely began to speak and confirmed that Sword was truly right. The girl was utterly shocked. She had fallen under the control of the demon's eyes and killed her husband because she thought her husband was the demon. She didn't realize what awaited her. Kneeling on the ground, she felt a rumble of despair enveloping her. Her hands were stained with blood. Her hands trembled. She hadn't expected this change. It seemed everything the boy had said was now just a delusion. This couldn't be happening. Liselot slowly went insane, screaming as she covered her face with her hands. Not all sounds could be heard. Elixir's face changed, and here he said the worst thing the girl could hear, that he wasn't her child. He touched his bangs, his fingers running through his black hair. He lifted the hair from one of his eyes and revealed his secret. It was Archie, the same demon she had killed before. Liselot's eyes blazed with anger and madness. The blonde screamed while covering her ears with her palms. This couldn't be happening. Her fingers scratched through her blonde locks. Her heart was filled with madness, and hot tears filled her eyes. Hell was devouring her life as if it were controlling her like a puppet. Her fate had been tainted by her own hands. A sweet desire for revenge filled the air. How painful it was to realize she had been violated and impregnated. Her smile was wide, but it wasn't a friendly smile. It was utterly evil. It was a laugh filled with arrogance. The woman slowly reached for her sword hesitantly. The demon continued to clap, waiting for this moment. Her body was tense. She was very eager to see how heavy the burden of a family was for this hero. Wondering if the demon's eyes would work, a purple flash appeared under her eyelids. Suddenly, the woman, whose tears ran hot, turned the sword on herself. It was unexpected. The weapon touched her neck, tearing through the flesh. Blood gushed out like a fountain. The boy stepped back. He did not expect this outcome. After all this, he didn't even have a chance to use that ability. He approached Lisa. Wow, this is unexpected, such a spontaneous action. He moved closer to the face of the blood-covered hero, where tears had frozen. How unfortunate. The death of her husband and the fact that her son had been devoured were too much for her to bear. Her head drooped, slipping from her hands. The blonde woman reached out to her child, asking him not to cry, not to let salty tears flow down his cheeks. She touched the boy's face gently and lovingly and said that everything would be all right. Archie was very surprised. What is this? Why so much compassion? She called the boy her son. Her eyes were softer than any flower petal. She bid farewell to her son after saying that she was almost there, that his mother was almost there. Her emotionless expression began to change. Her lips quivered. She bit her lip as if she were about to cry. She felt sadness and grief. These were the people who had taken the demon lord from her. But after all that, it was the demon who had taken the first step. One day, she and Liselot arrived at an unknown place on the edge of the forest. Here lay the grave of Lisa's mother's family. She spoke so easily about how the demon had killed her, including her mother, clearly showing that she had accepted it long ago. A gentle breeze played with her hair. Archie stood behind her, looking shocked. They placed a bouquet of flowers on the grave, and the blonde moved deeper into the forest, where only she had survived. If her father hadn't saved her, she would also be in that grave, not beside her son. Her life would have ended. Elixir turned his face away. He felt uncomfortable hearing that. He didn't know how to feel. Liselot placed her hand on the tombstone, apologizing to her mother for coming late, but today she had news. The wind played with her hair as if it was an answer from the other world. There was gentleness and a hint of sadness in the woman's eyes. She suddenly lifted her son into her arms, looking at him with a smile on her face. Her news was that she now had a family of her own. She leaned on the boy affectionately, and Archie was taken aback. He did not have the same feelings for the girl. She vowed that battles and revenge were in the past, and that from now on, she would live for her husband and son. Liselot begged her mother to take care of them. The memories began to fade, and the bloodied Liselot stood before him again. She looked at him lovingly and promised that her mother would always be with her and protect her. Her hand slipped from his face, her body releasing its last strength. She died with her son's name on her lips, all her muscles relaxed. Hunger came, darkness before his eyes. Tears flowed from Archie's eyes, with Liselot reflected in his pupils. Her warmth burned his cheeks. Who would have thought that a demon would cry while avenging humans? Even he was surprised by the emotions that rose within him. It drove him mad, perhaps because at that moment, he remembered the demon king who offered to become his family. He was still standing over his mother's body in this life, with the moonlight illuminating around him. His head hung low, contemplating what he thought about this woman now. His brow furrowed, his face expressionless, full of tension. His hands clenched tightly to his fingertips. There was nothing but a long pause, after which, with teeth gritting in anger, he drove away the one who had just been left alive, whose blood still stained his cheeks. He pulled out a knife he had previously prepared from behind his back. With a scream and rage, he thrust it upward. He was consumed by a hot and sharp thirst for revenge, his movements firm and clearly planned. Over and over, he brutally stabbed the weapon, deepening the wounds while shouting that this woman would never mean more to him than the Demon King. He finished his violent act, sword in hand, blood pouring over him. Family and ties with them were the weakest part of a person, he realized now. In his hands was a bloody crystal, as if it had just been extracted from his body. He intended to fully exploit the aforementioned weakness for his revenge, until the moment he could reclaim the Demon King. The heroes could only wait, but they must be vigilant because the one who had obtained the crystal stood under the moonlight, determined for the game to unfold according to his scenario. 40 years later, a large castle with many towers stood majestically. Outside, winter was cold, and snow fell to the ground, bringing mystery to this world. A figure dressed in black stopped at the door and knocked carefully. The guard asked who he was without fully opening the door, as the conversation took place through a small gap. The man wearing a fur hood replied that he was a guest destined to become a teacher. After the guard said he needed to see some documents, the stranger handed over a sealed letter that would determine whether he would be allowed to enter. The guard, who recently became aware of the stranger's identity, apologized for not recognizing him at first. The guard said he couldn't believe that the son of a hero had been invited to teach at the academy. The man outside slowly removed his hood, revealing black hair with long bangs. He was invited inside because he was the esteemed Elixir. A sly smile played on the face of the familiar figure. His grudge was ongoing, and he was here for a reason. Clearly, the Royal Academy of Heroes, as the name suggests, trains children to become heroes. The students come from all corners of the world and possess extraordinary abilities, which is why Archie had come here. It has been customary for the children of heroes to enter this institution. As Archie looked up at one of the towers, someone approached him. The man turned around, not expecting to see anyone. A girl with long green hair and glasses stood before him, welcoming him to the academy. Her name was Lick Weissman, a gentle and shy girl sent by the headmaster of the academy. She was asked to meet Elixir at the door. The man's face darkened as if annoyed at not being properly welcomed. Lick began to apologize and search for excuses, knowing the mistake wasn't hers. It was the students who had stopped her. Elixir interrupted her, displaying a gentle and friendly face, and said it didn't matter. His face shone with mental purity and sincerity. He then decided to take it upon himself to make the academy stand out. Her face blushed, and her gaze dropped to avoid eye contact. Elixir smiled awkwardly, impressed by how shy this girl was. He thanked the former teacher and approached the girl. For the past 14 years, he had established himself as a qualified teacher after the murder of Sword and Liselot. The corpses, not without the help of demonic eyes, were hidden by the villagers. He, their son, stayed with an acquaintance and then disappeared. Outwardly, everything went as he wished. This was how Archie became involved in the power of influence, being adopted by a nobleman and settling in the midst of prosperity. There, he learned to live in high society. He led a peculiar life, having many influential acquaintances and attending social gatherings. It could be said that he lived the tranquil days of a human, yet Archie did not want to enjoy the peace that humans did. The position and abilities of the Son of Heroes allowed him to do things he would never have received if not for the goal he pursued, which was to join the guild that hunted down the remnants of the Demon King's army. All this was done to gain experience and approach the status of a hero. He did not hesitate to kill demons like himself. He faced large crowds of monsters alone without a hint of fear or hesitation. He was ruthless towards his own kind. He did not feel intimidated by their nature, either because he himself belonged to that race or because that fear did not compare to the loss he felt when he lost the most precious thing he had. All this was done because Archie was determined to bring back the Demon King by any means necessary, even if it meant killing his own kind. He fought like a demon, crossing boiling fire and creating his own, killing creatures one by one. The monsters were not much different, shamelessly flaunting their demonic nature and using all their strength. Only the bravest heroes dared to approach them. Bright lights like explosions and the swinging of weapons all contributed to an atmosphere of dangerous and active combat. The problem for the demon was that its opponent was Archie. His body showed no trace of fear or hesitation. He stood firm on the ground, seemingly unmoved even by a tornado. From the fire emerged a large, terrifying demon that attacked him, with flames coming from its eyes, its mouth, and flowing through its veins. Archie used his power, his eyes glowing red. The demon suddenly stopped in shock, unable to believe what it was seeing. The monster wondered, "Those are demonic eyes, but how is that possible? This is a hero, so he must be one of them. But then, why is he killing his own kind?" From above, Archie drew a sword with a completely emotionless face. Magic filled the air, and a light breeze rose from the black void where he had drawn his weapon. He held the sword tightly in his hand, as if it weighed nothing, as if it had become a part of him, an extension of his arm. He calmly walked towards the demon without hesitation, without even a hint of fear. As he walked, he simply swung his sword. It was an almost invisible strike, as if he had brushed it accidentally. The air didn't even have time to part. The demon immediately began to crumble into small pieces like a sand sculpture, almost completely destroyed. It seemed as if it had never existed. Archie stood in the middle of the brutal battlefield, with human and demon casualties lying around him. Only he remained alive there. After long training and battles, he realized something. That killing his own kind was no longer an issue for him was not enough. He clenched his fists. What should he do? He needed to evolve further by any means necessary. Otherwise, he would not be able to achieve what he planned. The man would never reach the level of a hero capable of destroying fortresses and entire stars with a single blow. Realizing his situation, he decided to return to the beginning. Elixir sat in the Supreme Commander's office, serious and frowning. Given his background and achievements, an invitation to the regular army was only a matter of time. The Lord put out his cigar and said he thought an experienced man like him could be trusted to lead the knights in the regular army. He asked if the young man wanted to pursue a career in the military. Archie quickly rose and bowed, which the Lord might not consider disrespectful. In fact, he would quite like it, but he had his own preference for where he wanted to be sent. The commander said, "State your wish, and maybe we can grant it." That's when the young man expressed his desire to work as a teacher. He came to the academy with one reason and one purpose. As Elixir walked down the hall, everyone whispered, "Such a young and handsome teacher." Someone liked him, and all eyes were on the young teacher. His goal in coming to this academy was to brainwash the students, the children of heroes, and make them his pawns. Petrification, capture, intimidation, humiliation, clairvoyance, using all the powers of demonic eyes to paralyze the students present here. Then those characters would fully experience despair when their sons were beheaded. At that moment, someone bumped into him. It was a girl. She fell to the ground. Elixir crouched down and extended his hand with a gentle smile, asking if she was hurt. The girl's hands trembled. She saw something she didn't expect. A fire burned in her chest, and she didn't understand why the new teacher felt so stiff, and her pupils narrowed as if she had seen a rope she clung to in that situation. The young girl took the teacher's hand and stood up. She thanked the man and apologized. Elixir only had a moment to glance at her, but in that moment, he kept his eyes on her. The girl caught his attention. She herself ran quickly down the hall, perhaps in a hurry, and the situation was quite embarrassing. The black-haired man asked his guide who the young girl was. He explained that she was the daughter of the great hero, Lord Flugel, the blonde who was present at that moment. The beautiful young girl, Idly Ruthven, now became the center of attention. Perhaps it was time to continue his revenge. Archie was already giving lectures to the students about alchemy. He didn't know who had previously taught this topic, as many people might have misconceptions about alchemy. He closed the book while continuing to explain that people considered this a form of magic. He placed the manual aside and continued explaining the topic to the students with a serious look. Idly, who was interested, lifted her pen to her face, trying to understand every word. Archie also noticed this and was already preparing to trap her. So, the daughter of Flugel, the holy knight who had sealed the demon lord, had knowledge, skill, a handsome face, and exemplary behavior. No wonder this man admired her. However, Archie was worried about one thing. He turned his gaze to his student. Idly was isolated, with no trace of friendship. She was alone, sitting anywhere she could. Talented people tend to prefer solitude. She was deeply engrossed, and it showed on her face. Suddenly, a loud shout echoed in the classroom. Elixir glanced at one of the desks. A disrespectful student yelled that alchemy was useless to him. He put his feet on the desk, declaring that he didn't need lessons in potions or poison making. Elixir continued his lecture without paying him any attention. Using alchemy as a basis, he tore a page from a book and said that it encompassed more than just potion or poison making. He looked at the torn page and thought if that was the impression students were getting, he would change it immediately. Holding the blade between two fingers, suddenly it became something solid that angrily reflected light. He made sure that the blade cut the desk in half. The audience remained silent. It was a shocking moment. No one expected such a thing to happen. Elixir explained that he had merely increased the density by making it vibrate under the influence of an electric current. He held the blade in his hand and said that even that was enough to turn an ordinary blade into something as sharp as a razor. He threw it away, understanding the composition of the substance and enhancing its quality by exposing it to alchemy, and how extraordinary that was. He restored the damaged desk, and the object returned to its original state. He placed his hand on the cloth, coldly staring at the audience, and asked if he had managed to capture their interest. The students immediately cheered. It was so cool that no one could believe their eyes. What a marvel it was. Archie smiled softly. He was pleased with the attention given to what had been done. However, in reality, he felt sickened. A feeling of disgust tore through him. These students, who were so easily impressed, would become heroes. It was ridiculous. He looked at Idly, who was glowing with happiness and wonder. It seemed that the son of a true hero, at least, would never be surprised by such feats. But no, and he was there too. Archie was completely disappointed. The same attitude still demeaned the trick. Well, he cut a desk with paper, so what? With a sly and provocative face, he declared that he could do it himself, trying to make the professor tremble. Archie just stared at the man as if he were nobody, just a liar trying to hurt him. How funny. This could have ended well. But then Phil tried another method. A bright blue light flared up in his palm. He attempted to cast something. Since this fool had skills in alchemy, let him try something. As he tried to turn water into something else, a bottle of liquid appeared in his hand, aimed at a student. He himself answered that he could handle this easily and got up from his seat with an entirely indifferent attitude. He approached the professor's desk, glancing at it with doubtful eyes. He doubted until the end that this brave soul was capable of anything. The boy reached out for the bottle, his eyes gleaming with confidence and self-assurance. He chanted a spell, furrowing his brow, releasing energy. The water glowed bright orange with yellow sparks, and heat spread everywhere. The boy seemed to have done something extraordinary. He was even slightly exhausted. He asked Elixir what he thought of his performance, but nothing came out of the bottle. No steam, no water. This was not what we expected. This is what the professor said because he had asked for the water to be transformed into something else. However, the student replied that he had boiled it, and everything went well. But in the end, it was still water, just in a different form. Moreover, he used magic instead of alchemy. The boy backed away. He had just been humiliated in front of the entire class. He had used a very good technique but didn't receive any praise. The student headed to his seat, and Elixir touched his shoulder, noting that the spell was actually quite good. The boy rejected the attempt at consolation, roughly shrugging off the professor's hand just as his behavior had been in this class. His friends whispered, and the once arrogant boy now felt crushed. Elixir simply said that the young man actually had potential. He just needed to develop it. The professor leaned against his desk as the boys mocked one of their classmates, thinking they could try doing something themselves. His gaze became cold and threatening, and he commanded anyone who wasn't afraid to slam their face into the floor to raise their hand. He stood before them with a sense of superiority, feeling how much stronger he was compared to these teenagers. While the girls admired the professor, he was lost in his thoughts. He saw the boys in front of him not as objects of adoration but as demonstrations of skill. Then, he turned his attention to the girl from the Knight family, maintaining distance but without any malice. This was the balance that professors had to keep. He then waved his hand toward Litburn, asking her to come closer. The girl was shocked by this. It took her by surprise. Everyone turned their heads to look at her, waiting for her response. She hesitated, trying to say something, but the attention made her uncomfortable. The professor mentioned that she had an excellent academic record, that if she couldn't do it. The girl stood up. She was clearly uncomfortable. It was evident she didn't want to be the center of attention. She wanted to remain in her comfortable seat. She quietly descended the steps and approached the desk, gathering all her strength. She took a deep breath, trying to focus, pointed her hand at the bottle, and began the sublimation process. Light illuminated the space around the glass container. Archie was astonished. This was the method used by the alchemists of On, and she could execute it flawlessly. It was impossible. Then he noticed something strange. The girl blushed, her breath became quick and heavy, her heart pounded as if it would burst from her chest, and her body trembled. Archie couldn't believe it. He activated the Devil's Eye, a form of enlightenment. His irises glowed with a blue light as he looked at the girl in front of him. The professor nervously tried to swallow the lump in his throat, disturbed by what he saw. The girl stood in front of him, trying to do something with the boiling water. Clutching the table with her hands, she exhaled lazily, stopping her work, and sat down, barely breathing. She said that she was finished, her body trembling. The professor looked at her seriously, her green eyes shining on her face. Seeing nothing remarkable to mention, he simply wondered what the student had done to the water. At that moment, he slammed the container onto the table, and the liquid spilled onto the wooden surface. Simultaneously, he was shocked as green tendrils began to sprout from the table, and tiny green lights started fluttering around. Everyone in the class was also surprised. Some poked their fingers at it, while others screamed. The tree was alive. The water had turned into a potion. Archie Aris placed his hands on his face, hiding his shock and realizing that it was a growth potion that would take an alchemist days to create. He also noticed the details as he looked at the student with his demonic eyes. The student trembled with discomfort and excitement. This was unlike the student's usual shy, gentle, and awkward nature. He was breathing very slowly, but warmth did not spread throughout his body as he focused on one area in particular. A private area that he tried to cover with his hands. Perhaps it was a magical anomaly inherent to the best bloodlines. While the student could barely stand, this might work to the man's advantage. His face showed a sinister smile. After class, Lick praised Elixir. He had brilliantly taught his first class, and she was thrilled to have such a great teacher on the faculty team. The brown-haired man thanked her for the compliment and mentioned that he had a few questions to ask the teacher. The girl listened attentively, wondering what the new teacher would ask her. Elixir said that he had heard that teachers could provide additional and private lessons to the best students, if he wasn't mistaken. These were special lessons, right? Indeed, the academy offered this opportunity, but only for teachers who excelled in their field. Then, Elixir picked up a book, pointed at it with his finger, and said he wanted to continue the training if Lick agreed, of course. His face was so handsome that it suggested this student was promising, capable of reaching the highest peaks in alchemy. And she couldn't ignore such a thing, which made the teacher blush. She blushed, covering her mouth with her hand, and replied that the decision regarding special classes had been made during a selection meeting that she hadn't had the chance to complete yet. The brown-haired man jumped at the word yet, his eyes gleaming, which made Rika slightly scared. The girl said that the teachers demonstrated their skills in front of the best and most talented students. She felt nervous at the close distance. Archie's eyes narrowed slightly, implying that the students chose for themselves who would give them special lessons. He wondered if that was the case, and if so, he would need to speak with her directly, which made Lick even more curious. The man with green eyes noticed something very interesting in the hallway. The student we just talked about was speaking with a blonde-haired teacher with the same confused and awkward expression on his face. To be honest, Idla's father insisted that her training be handled by Vangel, the blonde-haired man. It was an intrafamilial decision, so she might comply. Archie's lips curled into a sinister smile as he thought about it, and a tempting plan seemed to form in his mind. The bright sun filled the academy's courtyard with light and warmth. The students were outside for a break and chatting. Harmony and a beautiful atmosphere enveloped everything. Idly observed everything with a sense of strangeness but with interest. The girls laughed loudly, talked, argued, and had fun, but the girl felt like an outsider in all these activities. She couldn't even approach them. His companions, unable to find a better option, made him turn around and decide to leave the place where he was staying. Suddenly, a voice behind him spoke to him. He was a little startled and turned around. It was Professor Elixir. He was reading a book with great attention and seriousness, pausing briefly to ask whether the girl's behavior was related to the fact that she preferred detachment due to her genotype. The student was impressed by the professor's keen understanding of what she wanted to do. He merely suggested discussing it while enjoying a snack, but his gaze remained cold and firm. They sat far apart from each other. Idly felt very awkward and looked at the man nervously. She did not like the dinner atmosphere. Elixir wondered if everything was normal or if something was wrong because of her behavior. The girl turned away, unaware that she was being observed in such a manner. She merely commented that the sandwich looked appetizing. The man simply muttered while preparing the food. Idly tried to lighten the mood by saying that his wife had prepared the snack for him and smiled warmly as she added that. Elixir briefly replied that he was not married and took a hearty bite of his sandwich. The awkwardness of the moment began to dissipate, and the heroine asked if the professor had made it himself. The professor continued to eat with gusto. Idly increasingly felt uncomfortable with the moment. The conversation did not go well, and the man did not seem to notice, even though he had invited her to eat with him. Eventually, the brown-haired man decided to suggest that they get some food for the girl as well. He opened the basket where the sandwiches were neatly stacked and suggested she take one. The girl picked a vegetable sandwich, saying she would only take one. At the same time, Elixir took exactly the part the girl had been eyeing, as if challenging her somewhat antagonistic attitude.